So the amount of casualties that comes out of this Civil War is going to be extremely high. We are actually going to lose more Americans in the Civil War than every other war that Americans fight in combined. So you combine all of the casualties of Americans in the from the American Revolution all the way up to the war in Iraq, and more people die in the Civil War. And that's for many different reasons. One of which obviously be that we were fighting both sides, right? So that automatically it's going to sort of be double the usual amount. But another major reason for that is actually going to be the amount of new technology, new military technology that comes in with no new military strategy. We're going to be using the same military strategy that we've been using, which is to line up, the military formation being to line up and charge and sort of stand in a straight line and charge ahead. That is still going to be the standard battle formation, but our weapons technology is going to be way past that, and it's going to result in some mass casualties at every battle. So most of our military leaders at this time were being educated at West Point. We've talked about West Point Academy quite a bit, and their education largely surrounded the tactics used during the Napoleonic Wars, and this it mostly revolves around having your infantry, which is your foot soldiers, or your cavalry, which is soldiers on horseback, to charge at the enemy. Like I said, standing in a line and charging at the enemy. This works great in the Mexican-American War, works great in the War of 1812, works great in the American Revolution. This is the standard battle formation for all the previous American wars before this. That is because of the weapons that we had at our disposal. In the Mexican War, the average musket had a range of 250 yards, but it was only accurate really at a distance of about 80 yards, which isn't good. That's not good at all. And it took about 25 seconds to reload. So you can only get off 2 shots in a 60-second time period. So, standing in a line and charging isn't that crazy when the person who's shooting directly in front of you can only load their gun twice in a minute. In the Civil War, that's going to change. We're going to change several different things. The first thing we're going to change is the shape of the bullet. We're going to have some new bullets coming out, one of which being the mini ball or the mini bullet. It has several different names, all relatively around that. And so the old shape of the bullet was a sphere. It was like a little ball. The new shape of the bullet is going to be more elongated, more similar to the bullet shape we know today. This will allow for a more accurate shot and a larger range. We're also going to cut a spiral groove on the inside of our gun barrels. That spiral groove is called rifling. So rifles have that on the inside. This causes the bullet to spin upon release. It's sort of like when you throw the football, you want it to spiral because that increases the range, how far the football will go, and the accuracy. You're more likely to get it into that person's hands that you're trying to throw to when there's a spin on the football. The same thing with the bullet. When the bullet comes out of the gun, it'll have a spin on it. It will go further and be more accurate. Rifles will now be accurate at 500 yards compared to the 80 yards that they were before. Soldiers can also reload rifles 10 times in a minute as opposed to 2 times in a minute. We're also going to get new artillery. Artillery is big guns, cannons. So cannonballs are going to be replaced with shrapnel. Shrapnel is a hollow ball with smaller shells, on the inside, and so the cannonball basically explodes on impact, ripping into everything around it, any troop nearby, not just the people who are right there where the impact is. We're also going to see fire canisters. Fire canisters are large shells filled with small bits of metal, having a similar release like shrapnel. Mass casualties are going to be the result of that. We're also going to see observation balloons. Obviously, we don't have an Air Force at this time. We just have Marines, Army, and Navy, and that is because the airplane does not exist yet. So obviously, we do not have the Air Force, but aerial military strategy is still going to arrive during the Civil War, and that's what I mean when I talk about observation balloons. Basically, like hot air balloons. that we will fly over sort of enemy territory. We can use that to direct artillery fire. This is going to give rise to the first use of camouflage, the type of camouflage that you can think of today. Not necessarily the same, but similar. We're also going to see machine guns. New machine guns have a manual crank in the back, and the whole time you're spinning the crank, bullets are being discharged from the barrel of the machine gun. We're going to see wire entanglements as defensive strategies, the first flamethrowers, gas shells like stink bombs and fog sort of distraction canisters. Telegraph is going to be important for military communication. We can instantly communicate with different troops. Railroads are going to be important to transport not only supplies but also troops, so that now when you call for backup, that call for backup is going to get delivered instantly right when you send a telegraph. And on top of that, your backup will arrive even faster because their transportation is going to be quicker. Sorry. We're also going to see new naval technology. We've got new ships called ironclads. Ironclads are armored gunboats covered with iron plates that are 3 inches thick. So they're nearly invincible to any type of cannon fire. So the naval battles are going to last much longer. So all of this new technology means that we're going to be seeing a lot more bloodshed during this war, unfortunately. So if you know anything about the Civil War and you know anyone's name, this is one guy you should know, Ulysses S. Grant. Okay, eventually he's going to be the commander of the Union Army. But in the beginning of the war, his strategy, his mission is going to be to capture and be working on the Mississippi River. So before he can be working on the Mississippi River, he's got to get to the Mississippi River. So in February of 1862, Ulysses S. Grant is going to lead 7 Union gunboats and about 15,000 troops up the Tennessee River. He's going to capture that fort there, Fort Henry, and they'll quickly surrender. And then he'll have completely taken over the Tennessee River. Then he'll move on to the Cumberland River and capture the Confederate fort there, Fort Donelson. And then their 12,000 soldiers at that fort, at Fort Donelson, will surrender to Grant. Opening up the Cumberland River and the Tennessee River for Union use makes all of the Confederates along the Mississippi vulnerable to attack. This is going to make it possible for another Union general, General Don Carlos Buell, to capture the city of Nashville. Capturing Nashville also makes it easier to start working on the Mississippi. So Grant is going to be working his way south now. Grant has about 38,000 troops with him by the time he finishes off the Tennessee and the Cumberland River. He's going to be continuing south. In March of 1862, he's sort of heading south, and the Confederates know what he's doing, and they want to block his advance. So there are 40,000 troops waiting for Grant to stop his path. So Grant stops short in a town called Pittsburgh Landing to wait for backup. He doesn't have 40,000 troops. He has 38,000. He wants a few more. And the Confederates know that if they wait for him to get any more help, then they could very well be outnumbered. So waiting for him to come to them is not an option. They need to attack now. So on April 6th of 1862, the Confederates surprise attack Union soldiers where they were camped at Shiloh Church. So this is the Battle of Shiloh. Shiloh actually means a place of peace in Hebrew. So sort of an ironic thing that we would have a battle there at this place of peace. So the battle's initially going very well for the Confederates. The Confederates pushed the Union all the way back to the Tennessee River. And then the Confederates think, we'll finish the Union off in the morning, so they go to camp, and Grant knows that if he waits for them to finish him off, then he'll be totally done for. So his backup troops arrive right around sunrise, and as soon as that happens, he then attacks the Confederate troops. So by 2:30 that afternoon, the Confederates were driven all the way back to where they started and finally forced to retreat. So the Battle of Shiloh is a Union victory, but a very bloody one. The Union actually is going to lose 13,000 men in just this one battle over these 2 days, and the Confederates will lose 10,000. So even though the Union loses more men, it's still a Union win. 1 in every 4 soldiers present at the Battle of Shiloh is either going to be killed or wounded. So a very bloody battle in the Civil War, but not even close to the worst. So this is all, leading up and getting the Union possible to launch the official Mississippi River campaign. So after Shiloh, Ulysses S. Grant is able to get onto the Mississippi River and begin working his way south to split the Confederacy and put that Anaconda Plan into action. So after Shiloh, Abraham Lincoln sends 100,000 troops to Pittsburgh Landing under Grant's command to be working their way south down the Mississippi. Now, while Grant is working his way down the Mississippi, Lincoln has 2 other guys that will be working their way up the Mississippi. So he sends 24 ships to the Gulf of Mexico, to down here, to begin pushing north. And to push north up the Mississippi, they first have to capture this major port city here in Louisiana, New Orleans. So the naval commander handling all this, the fleet will be commanded by Admiral David Farragut. Farragut is also going to have with him a military Army commander, Benjamin Butler, and he's going to be leading 15,000 men. So there are actually 2 forts, not just 1, 2 forts guarding New Orleans. So these guys will start working their way in April, trying to get past these forts. After 6 days of heavy fire, the forts are still standing. They haven't made any progress past these Confederate forts. So Farragut decides to try to slip past them at night. So on the night of April 24th, he's trying to sneak past them. The Confederates wake up, realize what's happening, and begin firing. Several of those Union ships were severely damaged, but most of them were able to make it through because they had tried this sort of sneaky nighttime strategy. So on April 25th, they finally make it to New Orleans, and the city quickly surrenders. So after capturing New Orleans, Farragut is able to continue moving up the Mississippi. They capture the cities of Baton Rouge. You can see Baton Rouge right here. They're going to capture Baton Rouge, and they'll keep moving up. They'll also capture the city of Natchez. And so while Farragut is capturing Natchez, by June, Grant is able to also capture the city of Memphis. So Grant is slowly working his way down south, while Farragut and Butler are working their way up north. All of this is sort of happening simultaneously. So remember, all of that is part of the Anaconda Plan. That's the official plan, the official strategy for the Union. That's the long-term plan. But they're also working on the short-term plan, don't forget, which is to invade Richmond. So if you remember, General Irvin McDowell from the First Battle of Manassas, First Battle of Bull Run, when he lost that battle, was replaced by a guy named George McClellan. So George McClellan is now commanding the Union Army. He's the one working on invading Richmond. Now, he knows that he can't march directly into Richmond. That's too obvious. They will expect him to come from the north or the west. What they won't expect is for him to come from the east. Why? Because that's where the ocean is. He can't come in from the east, or so they think. George McClellan decides that he will instead actually come through the east, move his army by boat down the Potomac River and across the Chesapeake Bay, allowing him to attack Richmond from the east. So in March of 1862, George McClellan begins moving 100,000 men in that direction. By April, the Union soldiers meet about 15,000 Confederates at Yorktown, which is about 60 miles outside of Richmond. So they are very, very close to getting to where they need to go. Now, I remember I said George McClellan has 100,000 men, but he very, very much outnumbers the Confederates, but he still is nervous. He actually asks Lincoln for more troops, but Lincoln refused, and that is because Stonewall Jackson has 20,000 men somewhere else, causing problems for Lincoln, and that's where Lincoln's mind is. He's focused on them. So Lincoln wants to keep soldiers on standby in case he needs them to defend Washington. He tells George McClellan to strike now. When George McClellan finally does strike and drives the Confederates back to Richmond, it isn't enough because General Joseph Johnston, who was the Confederate commander with those troops that were stationed in Yorktown, he has had time to call in more troops and backup, and the backup is going to be brought by Robert E. Lee.